Hello and welcome to Help Yourself ME CFS. Today's topic is using EFT or tapping to calm your nervous system. So this is going to be one of the tools that you could possibly look into to help yourself in your recovery. And just a little bit of background on this. I'm an EFT practitioner, and EFT is simply tapping on acupressure points while focusing on a particular problem to help calm the nervous system and help change your perception about that particular problem or situation. But in its very simplest form, you can use it just as a tool that you can use to calm yourself and relax. A big turning point in my recovery was realizing that a lot of my symptoms that I was experiencing was down to an overactive nervous system and stress response. So things like pain and tension in the muscles, sleep problems, cognitive issues like not being able to think straight or remember or even speak clearly. The anxiety and the tremors in my body that I used to feel and still do sometimes, and even the sensitivity to foods. I realized that I was having an overreaction to lots of situations that, yes, was to do with the chronic fatigue and the fatigue side of it, but also largely to do with an overactive stress response and nervous system. And I really had to get a handle on that, and I still have to almost every day do something to help calm that nervous system, because left to its own devices it goes haywire. Now this really, I was aware of this for quite some time and knew I needed to meditate and do things that were calming, and that was fine, that was ticking over. But I came to a point a good few months ago now where I felt like I could go back to work and do some kind of shift. So up until that time I'd been working as a therapist and just doing an odd hour here and there, one-to-one sessions, so that I could do an hour of work and then rest for the rest of the day. And that was suiting me very well, but I felt like I wanted to be involved in a work situation and actually do something fairly simple, working in a cafe, so it wasn't too mentally taxing, which is what I struggle with, being able to focus and concentrate for any length of time, and mental fatigue is a big part of my symptoms, but I felt like I could do something, I wouldn't say easy because it isn't actually easy, but fairly simple and straightforward, but in a shift basis for a number of hours. So I got some employment and started work. Now these shifts were 6 hours long, and I only was able to be there a few weeks before the lockdown. But what I experienced on my first few shifts was what I was fearing. So I was fearing being able to work for an hour or two and then becoming fatigued, and I didn't really know what would happen, and I didn't know if I would be able to handle it. So this was in the back of my mind, but I was quite happy to give it a go and quite confident that I was at a stage in my recovery where I could cope with this. So what happened was, I think it was after about 2.5 hours. This is a job where you're on your feet a lot, you're on the go, you're not really sitting down, and I started to get those familiar feelings. So first of all, I started to shake, feel dizzy, I felt very hot. And I thought, right, this is the start of my fatigue after only 2.5 hours, and that also added to, I think, a sense of panic. So I asked to go and sit down, And I got a drink and I put my feet up and I thought, well, is that it? Is that all I'm going to be able to work? Is a 2.5 hour shift? But I started to tap. And as I'm talking to you, I'll show you the points. So I just started tapping, just silently, on the side of my hand here. This is the point that you start with in EFT or tapping, but I was just experiencing all my symptoms and tapping and breathing. And then I went to the top of my head. And then the corner of my eyebrows here. I'll take my glasses off so you can see. So I was just tapping and breathing and tapping maybe 15-20 times on each point. And then I went to the side of my eye. And what you're doing with the tapping is you're tapping on and stimulating acupressure points, sending messages through your tissues to the emotional center of your brain, to the stress response, to calm it down. So under your eye, it sends soothing messages of reassurance, of you're safe, everything's okay. You're balancing the energy that's flowing in your body. And then you go under your nose. In this little delve underneath your lip. And breathing. And then you go under your collarbone, so you find your collarbone corners, you go back an inch and down an inch and you tap in there. I always use all my fingers so that you can cover a bigger, wider area. And you can, by the way, use just one hand and do one side or both. I do both. Makes sense. And I was breathing. And then under your arm, like on your bra straps, it's about 4 or 5 inches from your armpit. So you're just tapping or slapping, whatever's comfortable. If you can do both sides, brilliant. And then I would just go back to the top of my head and tapping. And literally within, and so you just go around like that, yeah. Can do the finger points. The finger points are just on the side of your nail, so the side of your thumb on your finger, and then you just move through your fingers, yeah. And that's really actually quite calm. You can do that without really being noticed as well, so that's a really nice thing to do. And you can just tap on the side of your hand without being noticed that much, if you're worried about that. I wasn't bothered. I was just trying to feel better. So within a few minutes, about 5 minutes I spent in that room. I had my feet up because I thought it was fatigue, and I thought, I've got to rest, I've got to somehow replenish myself. Had my feet up and tapped, and within 5 minutes I felt absolutely fine. Absolutely fine. The fatigue had gone, or the feeling of not being able to go on had gone. That feeling of, well, that's it, I'm going to have to go and lie down for 2 days had gone. And actually, mentally, I felt positive, I felt calm, and I went back to work. And I carried on. I had another hour work, and then I had a break of 20 minutes. I just had a 20-minute break where I went and had a drink and a snack, and I also tapped again. And then I completed the shift of 6 hours, and that to me was amazing, because I had been led to believe, or had come to the conclusion, that once I'd reached that point where I got those symptoms, I had to give up and go home and put my feet up and not do anything and not tax myself. And here I was working again. Now, I know that with chronic fatigue, you don't want to reach that stage where you overdo it and you get all these symptoms and you really, I can't think of the word now, relapse. and you know, you don't want that. But I think I was at a point in my recovery where I had been really working on it for a long time. I'd been eating well, taking supplements that nourished myself. I'd had a long period of rest where I didn't have to work, and you know, I was recovering, and I am recovering. So I wouldn't recommend that you, if you're in the first stages of this condition, that you do the tapping and that will solve everything and you can just go back to work for another 3 hours. But for me, at this stage, that was the right thing to do. And what was interesting was the next shift, I didn't have any symptoms at all, and I was tired, and so at the end of the shift, you know, I didn't do much, but it was markedly different from the shift before. And what I believe has happened there, because with EFT and tapping, you change your perception, you change how your body copes with something, deals with something. For example, you use it for fears and anxieties and phobias. That's one thing that you can use it for. And once you tap on all aspects of a particular phobia, for instance, when you meet that situation again, you don't experience the same reaction. So I think what I'd done was that my body was having a panic about being on my feet for so long, about having to work, about being in a work situation again, about will I manage, will I cope, is this all too much for me? I had this situation that my body was reacting and saying, hang on, this isn't right. It'd gone into a stress response. It was fearful for my safety. And with the tapping, I'd reassured it that I was okay, that nothing was going to get me, that I was safe, that I could cope, that I was ready for this. And all of that sort of change in perception had happened energetically, physically, mentally, so that the next day I was okay. And I didn't get that. Now, I only worked there 3 weeks before the lockdown, so you know, long term I didn't have time to test that, but actually each week was getting easier. So I hope I've ignited your interest in EFT and tapping, and just a tool that you can have to use in any situation. Try it. It's surprising. There's a lot of things online if you want to look at it. So Gary Craig developed emotional freedom technique. Sorry, I should have said that at the beginning. So EFT stands for emotional freedom technique. Is often known as tapping. There's also the tapping solution. There's Gwyneth Moss. She's from Yorkshire. If you would prefer a UK-based teacher. Gary Craig and the tapping solution in America. The Peaceful Heart Network is also a really good thing to look up. They use silent tapping. They call it the trauma tapping technique, and they use it specifically for trauma and that kind of situation. But there's a lot of free stuff online. There's apps, there's videos that you can tap along to. But in its very simplest form, if you just tap around on the points that I showed you, if you're feeling uncomfortable about anything, just try it and see if it's useful for you. I'd really recommend it. It can be used for lots of things, sort of deep-seated difficult memories and emotional traumas, as I said, fears, phobias, that kind of thing, but also for physical stuff as well. So as I've shown, you know, when I was experiencing a very physical reaction to what I was doing, the tapping really calmed that reaction down. I use it also often before I go to sleep, because I find still, you know, I don't sleep brilliantly and I wake up feeling quite tense. So if I can do anything at all to calm myself before I sleep, I do. And I just lie in bed and I'm not focused on anything in particular, and I just tap round the points maybe for 2 or 3 rounds round the points, and it really helps to relax me before bed. So thank you for listening. I hope that's been useful, and I hope in future to post some videos about specific tools that you can use and you can try and see if they're useful for you. Okay then, bye bye.